Hello and welcome. My name is Madeleine, and I am the co-head of news in Asia for Bloomberg. I am delighted and honored to be speaking today with Maria Ressa, the co-founder and CEO of Rappler, an investigative news outlet in the Philippines. Maria is also a media innovator, a staunch defender of press freedom and the importance of independent journalism. And of course, Maria has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize this year, together with Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov. Maria won the prize for the work she and Rappler have done to expose Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's bloody war on drugs, which has killed so many innocent Filipinos. The Nobel Committee referred to it as a war waged against the country's own people. Welcome, Maria, and congratulations. This prize is such a well-deserved.
No, I was just going to say thank you. I think this is for all of us. You know, this is a tough time to be a journalist, and that's what the Nobel Committee spotlighted.
Right, but this prize is also such a well-deserved recognition for your work and your courage in speaking truth to power, or as you like to say, holding the line. How does it feel now that you've had a bit of time to digest the award? What does it mean to you?
I'm still stunned. You know, it's and kind of the night that I got the call from Norway. I really tried to see in between all the interviews. You know, when was the last time a journalist won this? And I think this is a signal. The last time was in 1936, so 85 years ago, and the journalist couldn't go get the award because he was languishing in a Nazi concentration camp. I think this is a very powerful signal that now, again, it's almost like Back to the Future. We are at a moment where freedom of the press, freedom of expression is under threat, and it is systematic, it is global, and it's both a blessing and a curse to be where I am in the Philippines, because I don't think I've had any choice but to act the way I've acted, which is to continue to hold the line. But this is the committee saying, you know, our democracies are only as good as the journalists and the people who demand their rights.
Right. And particularly, I think for someone like you, you have paid such a hefty price for standing up to Duterte and his authoritarian government. If you think about the death threats, the rape threats, you've been inundated with posts filled with hatred and violence. You've been vilified as fake news queen. You and Rappler face all these legal challenges just for the simple task of doing your jobs. And it took the government 3 days to congratulate you for the award. And even then, they also mentioned that you still have to clear your name before the courts. Maria, just for our viewers, could you tell us how this all came about and how did this develop, this situation where, you know, it's okay to be violent, to hate, to spew hatred towards you and towards Rappler?
So I think that kind of the core problem of the cascading failures, you know, which my government exploited, and many other governments have done this globally, is the world's largest distributor of news, where our public sphere is so easily manipulated. You know, the methodology is the same in whatever country you're in. It's, you know, the attacks on social media that come bottom up. And in 2016, the narrative that was seeded is journalist equals criminal. And then in 2017, President Duterte says the same thing top down in his State of the Nation address. A week later, that weaponization of social media was followed by weaponization of the law. I got my first subpoena, and, you know, this is my 35th year as a journalist, and in less than 2 years, I had received 10 arrest warrants. It's unbelievable, but the enabling environment for the government to be able to do that is social media. And that's I think, the global alarm, right? We must make sure that facts are protected, and that has become increasingly difficult for journalists around the world.
Right, but do you think we can get this genie back in the bottle? I mean, in the current era of disinformation and lack of trust in the media, right? I mean, there's this anecdote or this story that you tell about how you met Mark Zuckerberg back in 2017, and you warned him about the danger of Facebook's outsized power in the Philippines, where the Facebook is the internet. Now, they're trying, they weren't particularly interested then in addressing it. They're now trying to self-regulate amid all the scandals and whistleblowers and, congressional investigations. The efforts are falling short. What do we need to do to put the genie back in the bottle, and whose job is it in particular?
I always go to this quote that captures where we are. The E.O. Wilson said that our greatest crisis is our Paleolithic emotions, the manipulation of our emotions, our medieval institutions, and godlike technology. How do we put the genie? So how do we put the genie back in the bottle? It's impossible to go back to the way it was. So the first is legislation, but that's going to take years still. The EU is leading in that. You have the UK with its online harms bill, and then you have the US with Section 230. But I think one of the shifts that happened with the latest whistleblower, with Frances Haugen, is that finally there's bipartisan support for legislation, but it's not going to happen fast enough to help us in the Philippines in our presidential elections in May next year. The problem is that the impact of these algorithms are worse in the global South. Let's even talk about Hong Kong, right? The freedoms that have been pushed back have impacted. Jimmy Lai was a friend of mine, right? So I think this is global in scope, and a lot of these things, again, how do you seed acceptance of these draconian actions of government? You seed acceptance through violence and fear, a Duterte formula, and then you repeatedly say it on social media, so you manufacture this reality that acts almost like a fertilizer for when government acts the way it does.
Right. And would you tie this whole disinformation, these platforms that sort of seem to democratize information but don't actually, right? Do you tie that directly? Do you think that is directly tied to the way press freedom is under attack all over the world, and particularly in Asia, right? There's
Yes.
data from the Committee for the Protection of Journalists that shows 274 were in prison in 2020. That's a record number. China has now, for the second year in a row, jailed the most, 47. Indeed, one of our own news staff, Hayes Fan, has been detained for 10 months now. You've been arrested in your own newsroom. We've seen, like you said, that happened to Jimmy Lai. Why is this happening now? Is that directly tied, do you think, to technology and the digital platforms? And why is it so pronounced in Asia?
The game changer is technology. And I would think that really began, journalists, we lost our gatekeeping powers to tech. I would say, the dual realities really began in 2014 in the Ukraine. But the dominoes that impacted elections and democracies really began falling in 2016. So 2015 was when instant articles were introduced by Facebook using the same type of algorithms that would spread a salacious gossip or, the joke you heard. They didn't change the algorithms. And, we keep pushing that news, again, gets treated differently from that facts get treated. But then in 2016, President Duterte was elected in May. Brexit happened less than a month later. And then you had the Catalonia elections, you had the Macron, you had Trump elected in November, right? It's a cascading failure because it's unleashing a virus of lies in an information ecosystem. I always say this is like an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem because we cannot tell fact from fiction. That is what the algorithms, that's the way they're designed. And you can actually say that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. So you can say that the world's largest delivery platform for news is biased against facts and bias against journalists. So that has helped turn the world upside down. And, how do we solve it? How do we put the genie back in the bottle? I think legislation, that's first. But beyond that, those of us on the front line, and why our countries? Because our institutions are weaker. We're newer democracies. Corruption was always, feudalistic, paternalistic societies. Corruption was always a factor. And when you allowed power to insidiously manipulate us, these micro-targeting takes on a new power. So changing, even the United States, look at the United States after January 6th, right? They had to break glass. All the American companies were all hands on deck. They're not going to do that for every single election this year. I don't think they'll do that for our elections, but I appeal that they do because we have so much at stake.
Yeah, that's right. I think the upcoming Philippine elections, I'd be interested in your view, like how you assess the sort of the weaponization of social media that we've talked about, and how this will impact, in your view, the upcoming elections. You know, how entrenched is this information warfare since 2016?
Since 2016, it's 5 years of that, right? So people and our cognitive biases then stick to what we have. Look, I think our elections in May is indicative of what is really the war. This will be a battle for facts, because just a week or so ago, 35 years after the Marcos family was ousted by a people power revolt in 1986, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Bongbong Marcos, is now running for president. And in 2019, Rappler exposed the networks of disinformation that had been created to help him in his run for vice president, which he lost by a narrow margin. Now he's coming at it again. And, in September last year, Facebook actually took down information operations from China that were not just attacking me and Rappler, they were polishing the image of the Marcosists, and they were campaigning for the daughter of President Duterte in the May election. So you see, that was September 2022. So this is geopolitical power play. And to allow this kind of insidious manipulation, I think, makes a farce out of our elections. So we will not have integrity of elections without integrity of facts. So that's an appeal, right? Please turn up the NEQ, the news ecosystem quality. You did it in the United States after January 6th, do it in the Philippines, because our democracy is at stake.
Hand in hand with the spread of disinformation, we've seen a rise in authoritarianism, as governments have used the excuse of the pandemic to whittle away civil rights of individuals. How can this trend be reversed? Or are we destined to follow this path, go down this path, where our freedoms just get sort of taken away until they're all gone?
I think that's the signal the Nobel Committee pointed out, right? I think we have to fight for it. I joke because I have a very young team and they follow Marvel. So I just kept saying, Avengers assemble. This is it. We have to actually fight for our rights. Otherwise, we will lose it. I think that nothing is set in stone. It's been a steep decline, but I think that's a warning. And I hope, I always say, I think this will require journalists working together, collaboration on a massive scale. And if an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem, it requires a lot more from governments, the same way that they came together post-World War II to create the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think this is another one of those moments. We don't want to go back. We don't want to lose our democracy. I think that's something that needs to be stated by every. Democracy has become a man-to-man, woman-to-woman defense. So, I'm writing this book where I'm asking the question. I've been forced to really lay out my answer. Then the question is simple. What are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? You answer that.
Yeah. Do you get the sense that governments are actually engaging? I mean, you sort of noted Europe, you noted the US, but do they actually sense the urgency that I hear coming from you?
Not always, but I don't stop. That's one. And then I think the second thing is, look at ASEAN and the position it just took on Myanmar. That's new, right? So we have to celebrate the small wins, because this is death by 1,000 cuts, right? And you're right, we have to cover every single one of these cuts because they're bleeding out. But the full thing is that our body politic needs to be able to recover from the blood being drained out. We need to bandage 1,000 cuts. And I think if journalists raise the alarm, if we demand better, not just from governments, but from the tech that is delivering our news, then we'll have a much better chance of protecting, of saving our democracies for the next generation.
I'm afraid we're nearly out of time, Maria, but I do want to bring one last question, the conversation back to you and your incredible journey. The pressures you face and the constant harassment and threats, the prospects perhaps of spending, or perhaps even the rest of your life in jail, the worry that this brings around your safety and well-being. How do you, in your personal life, hold the line? How do you keep believing?
It became real that could be a possibility in 2019 after I kept getting arrested. And I was really exhausted in 2019. I wasn't getting very much sleep. And at that point, I accepted it could be a possibility. It took me a little while, but even the idea of being able to sleep was a good thing. But it is what it is. And then I embrace your fear is something I say all the time. And, we have a fantastic team. And I guess part of what I'm trying to do is I think that whether I go to jail will be dependent on how good a job we do as journalists. So I focus on, here's the path. The corruption investigation at the Senate, we broke a story that had all of the documents connecting these companies. It was with OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. It took us 8 months to do that. I think, I feel better in knowing that even though there's a Damocles sword over my head, that I will not let it allow me from acting the way I normally do, right? Because the first battle is in your mind. I am not going to change. I'm too old to change. So, cease and desist. Give us back our democracy.